Which, on a 2 to 5 year time horizon, which are you more bullish on, HEX or PulseChain?
We organize sacrifice pools for both. I think one of the things that I learned in the HEX release using the adoption amplifier was that, it's great to be an early buyer of coins, but if you can really understand launch mechanics, that's where the real money is made. And so that's why we started those pools as soon as we realized, hey, this is where you get this multiplier. Actually, in fact, what I would say is that the real advantage in the Pulse and PulseX launches was that if you got people together in advance and were able to take money from the real world and put it into crypto early, not only did you get a multiplier advantage by having more people in, but you also got a run up in the price of HEX if you were early enough to start formulating these pools, if you were taking people from fiat into HEX. So that's where we really benefited. So we had similar size pools for each for Pulse and PulseX, although my personal stake in PulseX is probably 10x what it is in Pulse. And I think in the short term, you're going to see a lot of sell pressure from PulseX to Pulse.
Just want to ask that too. So the 10x, was that because you had more confidence in PulseX, or was it other factors?
So it's based on time horizons. I think PulseX, the deflationary aspect of it with the fee or the buy and burn function, I think that's going to be really, really powerful in a 2 to 5 year time horizon. And I'm able to withstand personally the impact of the probably relatively poor performance of PulseX relative to Pulse in the first 6 to 24 months of the project launches. So I would imagine you'll see Pulse trading at trading above PulseX for that period of time. But then I think the buy and burn function will really kick in. And we've looked at the code for that pretty closely because we're building projects to interface with the PulseX exchange. And so having really dug into it and having seen the power of that buy and burn, I really think that there's a lot of value to that PulseX on that 2 year post-launch time horizon.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, sorry to cut you off on there for a second, but yeah, you want to finish HEX versus PulseChain next few years?
I have said for a long time that I think the real advantage in HEX will be on the EHEX side, because I think you'll see a lot of people bridging and taking their EHEX and maybe even selling and moving it over to PHEX or HEX. So I think that there's a potential advantage for people who stay in the EHEX side and try and buy up some of that supply and stake long term, especially when you consider the abundance of fiat on and off ramps that are available to you and the different exchange options. And also, the potential to, maybe sell one of those things and just use like a liquidity to take a loan against it and then withdraw to a fiat bank account. I think there's some potential over there. So I'm not going to be one of the people who's racing over to PHEX. I think HEX on Ethereum still is going to have a lot of value.
So a lot of people probably look at it like, oh, how could you even compare HEX versus PulseChain if you're starting now? HEX is already, even now, it's at 3 or 4 cents. And it's not near a launch phase price like PulseChain. We suspect PulseChain may be. But the interesting thing here is at PHEX and whether it dumps or not. And does PHEX dump down to sub-penny, near, not quite, HEX launch prices? I wouldn't say that, but what if it goes super low and you do kind of get that, throwback HEX, which could be more comparable to a PulseChain launch price. What do you think is going to happen there? Any ideas?
I think the lack of a fiat on-ramp at the launch of Pulse is going to mean that it's going to be difficult to get economic energy into the system. And so I would love to see the building of fiat on-ramps dedicated to PulseChain. There are some issues with custody specifically. If anyone's curious as to why people aren't building this, custody of assets in stablecoins is the #1 reason, because the big players in The custody space don't support Richard Heart projects unless you beg them to. So, think of Fireblocks, for example, as the #1 custodian that is mostly resold by every other supplier. They didn't support HEX until we actually went and asked them about it maybe 9 months ago. And they're not planning to support PulseChain natively either, even though it's an EVM chain. So I think the lack of ability to get economic energy into Pulse at launch is going to be a little bit of a struggle. And I know that there are bridges out there, and I know that people have tools to get economic energy over there. But I think all of those things are friction points. And so, I think that HEX on ETH still has that value, and that's the reasoning, or that's the rationale that I have for it.
Gotcha. Very cool. Predictions for HEX if PulseChain launches this year, PulseX. What do you think price? We're going to be looking at prices wise by the end of the year.
Look, obviously this isn't financial advice. Do your own research.
If you need a moment to go get your crystal ball, go ahead. Just go get it.
Look, I'd be stunned if HEX closed the year below where it is currently. I know that we are subject to market trends and broader things that are happening, but it's been a pretty significant drop for the best part of 12 months now. It depends where you want to take the high from. So it's not a long history of a chart, but if you chart it against some other assets in the space, we're probably due for a little bit of a run up. There is the potential for it to go lower because of the Richard Heart law, or Hart's law, where assets move based on the liquidity that they're paired to. But luckily, we're seeing over time a little bit of the liquidity that connects HEX to Ethereum dry up, and more of it go towards stablecoins. So that tends to suggest that you would be able to get a run up in HEX a little bit more easily if it's depegged from those other major assets. So, I'd be stunned if we didn't finish the year in HEX up from where we are now.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting year for sure. I agree with a lot of that. Yeah, it's macro trends are interesting. How long do we? It's probably not going to be a hockey stick. I wouldn't suspect. Said this at the Pulse conference the other day, talking to some folks on the panel. I'm like, I don't think it's going to be hockey stick. A lot of people are saying, they think as soon as the bear market ends, okay, bull market. It's not. A lot of times there's a lot of sideways in between on that. So would get my hopes up as far as that goes. But
exactly, there's big assets in the space that have had 2-year and 3-year sideways, right? And one of those things that if you've watched any Richard Heart streams for any period of time, you know that you have to be in the asset for a week out of every bull market in order to realize all of the major gains in it. About 50% of the gains happen in a 7-day period over that bull run. So there's a lot of sideways, and you have to be able to hold, and you have to have the aptitude for it. And you need to be able to recognize that your asset's going to decline by 90% at some point. And then you're going to be in the I don't know what to do phase for 18 months or 2 years. And I think that's probably where a lot of us are right now.
Well, I would say the do nothing phase, or don't do anything that jeopardizes your wealth.